Alright, now we got our kick and a little bit of texture, so let's move on to the drums. I like to do the drums first because it already gets me grooving a little bit, and it's much more fun to create a bass line when you already have a groove going on. I feel like when you just make the bass line with just a kick, then you don't really get a feel of what the bass line sounds like in context of the rest of the track. And you know, every element does stand for itself, but in the end the track consists of many elements playing at the same time. So you always need to be aware of the sound in context, in combination with all of the other elements. I like to do my drums partly as MIDI clips, partly as audio. It's up to you. The advantage of audio is you can see the sample. A lot of people like to do their kick also just as samples so they can see the waveform at all times, which helps mixing. It's just a matter of personal preference. Now let's drag in some claps. Let's go to the Production Music Live folder and just dig a little bit through the samples. Go to Shots, Claps, and just have a listen. Now this is already sounding quite good. It's the typical 909 or 808 clap sound. It's quite crunchy, has quite a transient. So let's use this, and we put it on the 2 and the 4 because house music. Duplicate this, bring down the volume. Now we group this. It's important to have some structure. I know sometimes when you're in the heat of producing, you just create tracks and disregard the color code, but it does help, to be honest. I have to remind myself to do it. Let's call this group Clap. And also, every time I'm creating a new audio track, now it's going to be at 0 dBs, but since we're mixing at low volume, we can save a little bit of time if we just say, let's say -10 decibels, and we just use this as our default. Save as default audio track. So now every time we create an audio track, it's going to be already at -10 decibels, which saves us some time. So now we just have our basic clap. Sounding fairly good, fairly typical for the genre, but let's make it a little bit more interesting by giving it some stereo width. And easiest way to create stereo is to pan samples to the side rather than throwing stereo enhancers on there, if you have the possibility to do this. And claps are a very good way to do this, because when you pan those samples to the side, because the way they have a lot of frequencies, there's not going to be, most of the time, a lot of phase issues, so we can get away with panning some to the side. Let's just have a look. This one, for example, has quite some stereo width. Let's throw it on there. Bring it down. And also, one thing that you can do with claps is you pre-shift them a little bit to also give it a little bit of movement. One way I like to do this sometimes is I go to the side to the delay button. And this actually is for latency compensation, but for me it's just a quick way to pre-shift all claps without having to do too much work. So I just bring down the time to -5 milliseconds. And now we hear the clap is a little bit pre-shifted, so it sounds a little bit snappier. You don't have to do this. In some tracks it works, in others it doesn't work so well. I feel like now I want to do it. And now, to create some more movement, let's not have every sample sound the same. Let's have a little bit of variation. So let's pick a clap with a longer decay, like this one, clap 14, and just throw it maybe on every second one. Duplicate. Now this is fairly loud, and we don't need the transient and the attack from this clap, we just want the tail. So let's zoom in and fade out the beginning, because we just want the tail. Duplicate it and bring down the volume. And one more way to create some movement is we can also reverse part of the tail, like so. Copy this, Command C. And paste it, Command V. Shorten the sample to right where we want it to end, and just press R for reverse. Bring down the volume. I feel like it's a little bit off. Let's use it for the last clap and see how it sounds. I feel like this one should be tighter. You know, I'm just changing stuff in between, always listening to the loop, seeing what feels right. We're also going to do a lot of listening when we're going on to the arrangement, because you really have to see what does the track feel like and not just look like. Okay, it's very important that you focus on what you hear. Making music is 99% listening and 1% making. All right, let's process these claps a little bit, because we layered many of them on top of each other. A good way to glue samples together and also to give them some character is saturation. And I like to use a lot of saturation. Sometimes I even prefer saturating over compressing, because most saturators already do compress while they're doing what they're supposed to do. So you can save a little bit of steps and give it a bit more character. And with this type of tech house, which is a little bit heavier, we also want that grid. So let's throw on some saturation. The saturator of Ableton, for my taste, works pretty well. It has some different options. Analog clip, you can just turn up the drive a little bit if you just want a bit. Let's have a listen. But if we want different character, we can also change the type of saturation. Let's go to medium curve. We want a little bit more. Make sure we equalize the volume, turn down the output so it doesn't hurt your ears. Very nice. Let's throw on an EQ8. I don't use it all the time, but it's a very helpful visual aid sometimes to spot some excess frequencies. But it's all looking pretty good. I find when shaping your claps, of course you have to listen in the context of the whole track, but there's some little tweaks you can do to make your clap sound a little bit heavier, a little bit more industrial, which is boosting the middle harmonics a little bit excessively, like so. If you still wanted to have a lot of brilliance, then you can boost the frequencies that are higher, which are above 10 Hertz. Now this is very sharp, so let's not do that too much. Let's just go for the middle harmonic. There's several reasons why we want to use an EQ8 or why we want to use equalization. One, of course, is mixing, and if we mix, we want to make small tweaks, okay? But in this case, I'm using it to shape the sound of the clap. So this is not for mixing purposes, this is not for making it clean, it's just to make it sound more original. So we're boosting this frequency, and then we're also telling the saturator where it should saturate the most, because this is going to be the loudest signal that's going into the saturator, so it's gonna distort this one a little bit more. And also bringing down the resonance a little bit, because it's going to be too harsh, we're losing some headroom if we do this. So again, the saturator also compresses a little bit, and we're just making use of this. And now we can bring down the volume of the claps. Now, of course, this is still fairly dry. We do want it to be tight, but we also need it to have a little bit of ambience, a little bit of room. So let's go to our reverb section, to the room section. And once again, I'm using Garage because I don't want too many different types of reverbs in my track. You can get away with having a few different types, but I wouldn't recommend using a different type of reverb every time you need reverb, because we do want our drums to sound like they were playing in the same room, which also glues them together acoustically. So let's use the Garage, bring down the dry wet. Sounding a little bit too long for my taste. Let's make it tighter by bringing down the decay. This is good. Let's cut out a little bit of the high frequencies